Welcome back. Now, Women's Month is a time to reflect on the many strides that South African women have made over the years. But the ever-increasing cases of gender-based violence actually dampen the celebratory mood, with more young women losing their lives in the most gruesome killings at the hands of those familiar to them. And around about this time last year, Wits student Asithandile Zozo was killed by her boyfriend. Asithandile was an activist instrumental in organizing protests after the killing of UCT student Uyinene Mrwetyana exactly 2 years ago. And then last week, Hare University student Nosicelo Mtebeni was also murdered, and the man accused of her murder, Aluta Pasile, appeared in court yesterday. And releasing the first quarter crime statistics for the 2020-21 financial year, Police Minister Bheki Cele revealed that crimes such as murder, sexual offences and all categories of assault had actually registered a 60.6% increase, with over 10,000 people having been raped between April and June of 2021. So to talk to us more about the fight against gender-based violence, we're joined by Advocate Madumise-Pajibo, who's the Director for Wise for Africa, and Desiree van der Walt, Limpopo Chairperson of the Democratic Alliance's Women's Network. Ladies, good morning. Thanks so much for being with us here on Morning Live.
Good morning. Good morning. Sakina.
So in the introduction there, the names of the young women that we mentioned, they were killed, and they are just 3 names out of the countless number of women who have actually lost their lives at the hands of partners or those familiar to them. So just looking at this particular picture, young women in the prime of their lives, the 3 that we mentioned, all 3 students with the brightest future ahead of them. Should we say that the country's women are under siege by those who are supposed to love and protect them? Would that be a fair characterization of what's going on, Advocate Brenda?
Certainly, and I think we shouldn't shy away from saying that we are under siege. You are under siege in your home, you are under siege in the church, you are under siege in the trade union movement, you are under siege in a political party, you are under siege in your workplace, you are under siege as you walk in the street minding your own business. So if the obsession is with women is that we can do as we please with them because we've got authority and control over them, and that's your upbringing that tells you that you can do so, then we are going to be victims and survivors of sexual assault and rape and femicide, because men believe that they have dominion over women. We are under siege, and we cannot sugarcoat it any longer. What I'm looking for now is, and we have said it so many times with this government, that you can't continue to say that we're in a pandemic and gender-based violence is a pandemic, but your response is not congruent to what you are saying. So I'm looking now for a fusion center. If you can have a fusion center for all the corruption that happens, and have all the law enforcement agencies in one place, and so that they can tackle the crime that is committed, then we are asking for a fusion center for gender-based violence in this country. It cannot be treated like a by the way and is treated with urgency once women protest, because we keep on laying our bodies in the front to highlight the scourge of gender-based violence. And once this matter is gone, everything stops again, and then we come back once there's another gruesome murder that has happened. So can we stop playing to the gallery and start to treat it with urgency? And we want a fusion center now to deal with gender-based violence.
So just to that point of playing to the gallery, government would probably say, well, they've done everything to mainstream this particular issue. The president has himself gone out, and headed up some of these conferences that have taken place. Money has been put aside to deal with this particular matter, particularly ring-fenced for dealing with issues such as gender-based violence and women's matters in particular. You have a whole portfolio in cabinet that is basically tasked with looking at the well-being and the upliftment and empowerment of women and children. So government would say, but we are doing all we can. So how do you respond to that then, Advocate Brenda?
I will safely say, without a fear of contradiction, that it's all just been playing to the gallery, because I was part of the process of getting us to this point where we have a national strategic plan on gender-based violence. That strategic plan was never budgeted for and allocated money. The president announced in his speech on the 9th of August this year that there's 22 billion allocated to gender-based violence. We have been asking, how is this money allocated? We have not received answers so that we understand how all the different players are going to be resourced to be able to respond adequately to gender-based violence. We still, and I'm happy that we've got a member of parliament in the form of the DA, who's a political party, that we're still waiting for all the amendments in parliament to be finalized and passed so that we can move on and start to hold police officers, we can still hold SAPS, hold the prosecutors responsible for their failures. The Domestic Violence Amendment Act is still in Parliament. It's not being finalized. The Sexual Offences Amendment Act is still not being finalized. It will be 2 years that these bills were put before Parliament and still no response. So, can they? And I'll challenge them. Come and tell me what is it that you're doing practically to effect the changes that you're effecting, because the experience of the many women, the 20 women that I have at Wits that I'm dealing with on rape, just the 20 victims that have come to us have been let down by the very same criminal justice system that we're talking about, right? And we're trying to force and fight to ensure that those cases are addressed and attended to. On a daily basis, that's what we do. Most women don't have the resources to escalate these cases the way we do. We push and send it to the relevant police officers to demand answers and to demand action. We cannot live in the country that forces us to do that. It has to come natural that when I report a crime that has been violated, it's treated with dignity and urgency, and that there is recognition that it must be resolved sooner rather than later. And that's not what we're experiencing in this country. So, let's challenge them. I would like to have that conversation directly with them and tell me exactly what they have been doing, because I'll give them real practical cases that we are dealing with.
Desiree, let me give you a chance to respond to that before I venture into more pointed questions with you regarding some of the issues that you have raised as the Democratic Alliance in Limpopo especially. But just in response to what Advocate Brenda is saying, the role of the legislators in this country, has it been urgent enough? Has there been a real urgency in terms of coming up with the appropriate legislation, passing the legislation, and really dealing in a very honest, genuine, authentic and urgent manner with gender-based violence?
Well, no, Advocate Brenda is absolutely correct. It took years for the latest 3 pieces of legislation to appear very recently before Parliament. And it's quite a long way before we would see that finalized and gazetted as an act. And the challenge, of course, with legislation is that you can write as many pieces of legislation as you want to. If the justice system, and particularly if the police, is not doing their duties and not protecting women wherever they might be, then we will have, shamingly, a president standing on several podiums announcing that we are in a second pandemic, and that is GBV. It cannot be. When we have legislation, we must be, as a country and as a government, be able to implement that legislation, that we can act on it swiftly. But we see that there's quite a lack, and I think for various reasons. But it is shocking, and she is very much correct when saying we are under siege. And it is now going not only where Advocate mentioned it, it also now our girl learners at school, is our senior citizens in old age homes. In Limpopo, several businesswomen were murdered last year. And I spent every possible court case time in our province I try to attend, because you have to have oversight in courts to actually see what is happening in the justice system. And it is shocking. Cases take forever. Sometimes the way it's dealt with is not, there is no matter of urgency. We need urgency. It cannot be that 10,000 women have been raped in the last few months, which is a quarter of 3 months. It cannot be that Limpopo has a 97.6% increase in sexual offences compared to the same period the previous year. There's something drastically wrong when it comes to the issues of these type of offences.
So what can be done? Because we all quote the stats and, we know what they are. More than the stats, we know what the lived reality of women are. So what can be done, Desiree? You, for example, in your statement said that Limpopo recorded a total of 1,075 sexual offences, increasing from that 2019-20 stats that were released, the first quarter statistics. But how much of an impact has the lockdown had on the scourge and just women being under siege? And also, what can we practically do? Let's say today, what can be done today so that we can kickstart this process of dealing with this particular scourge adequately?
Yes, I honestly believe that we must start with SABC I really think that we need a police minister who actually can deal with the issues affecting the vulnerable in our society, our women, our LGBTIQ community. I think parading with an army full of policemen and protection when you walk the streets is not going to stop any person who wants to rape or murder. There must be something else that the police minister can do. If you just look at the police stations, how they are equipped to deal with these matters. If you look at, and I'm sad to say, I'm sure in other provinces as well, in Limpopo, very often there is a culture when a woman comes to a police station that if it's a close family member or friend, that the police advise them that it is not correct to open a case against a family member. Now, we all know that that is not correct. It can never be correct that SABC can give a response like that to any person who's been raped or sexually assaulted. It cannot be. But we can do petitions. We are next week actually delivering a petition to the President's office in the union buildings, but nothing comes of it. We have seen so many petitions going to Parliament, to the relevant committees, and it gets discussed, but there is no absolute action. And I think Advocate Brenda is absolutely correct. We want action now. We should have had action a long time ago. And there's got to be a complete mind change of this perception that a women's no is actually a yes. It starts in our households. It starts at schools. And I don't know. I think the lockdown, I think the economic situation in our country has had an impact. Can imagine when you have an abusive partner and now suddenly due to level 5 lockdown, you have to stay at home with this individual 24 hours a day. Surely it's going to get worse. And we've seen since the alcohol has been in a way lifted, and I'm not saying we must have an alcohol ban, but we did see certain cases regarding these assaults being better. But that is not the way. The way is that when we have legislation, the legislation must be implemented. Our women, as in our constitution, everybody else in this country, should be safe. The police should protect us. And when there are cases, they should be speedily dealt with.
Let's talk, Advocate Brenda, about the role of culture that Desiree touches on. The role of culture and patriarchy and how that also is being used to undermine this particular struggle, because I think it was about 2 weeks ago there was a story in the media about a young girl who was raped, and then I think it was in KwaZulu-Natal, the perpetrator actually then went to the family to pay inhlawulo. Now, these sort of things happen, and these are realities that women have to contend with all the time, where families somehow also play a role in accepting such bribery, I would say, to make some of these crimes go away. Very often you have members of the family, be it an uncle, a brother, a father, a cousin, who are the perpetrators themselves. And families will say, just be quiet so as to keep the peace, so as not to shame the family. So let's talk about the role of culture and patriarchy, especially in undermining this fight against gender-based violence.
Correct, Sakina. If you look at the National Strategic Plan and what are the structural drivers of violence, of gender-based violence, patriarchy ranks number one, right? Because we understand that we live in a patriarchal society that celebrates masculinity. And if that's the case, and these are the visions that we see on a daily basis, that power resides in men. And that's what we see daily, and I'm bombarded with those images. And we see how men, when they show their aggression and they show their power, it's like something that should be, all of us should be looking forward to and celebrate, because that's how you demonstrate that you are powerful, by showing your machismo and your masculinity. So patriarchy, and that patriarchy, which is a system, it permeates in the entire society, in entire systems that we have. Whether it's a system in the criminal justice system, it manifests and raises its head on how a prosecutor will look at your case in a docket and think, there's nothing wrong with this, what this man did to you. That's how I was brought up. So you have a prosecutor who does not understand, who centers his experience in your case and decide that it's not worth prosecuting. You have to approach a police officer who has been brought and socialized to believe that he's got power and control, and why do you come to him to tell him that you have been violated? And they will tell you, I don't care about the law, but this is what I know, so you can go and sort it out with your families. So patriarchy plays a big role. Culture plays a big role, and let me deal with it quickly. When the announcement was made by the MEC of Education in Gauteng on what they call teenage pregnancies, and it's not teenage pregnancies, because once we start to label it incorrectly, we'll continue to say it's teenage pregnancies. It's young girls, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, who were raped. And we are so comfortable to stand in a legislature and read out those deaths and not tell the nation what has happened to the perpetrators of this rape against these young girls. And we want to place the blame and the burden on the young girls and their parents, and not force men to take the responsibility of having violated those young girls. So that's for me, it's important to deal with, because it's happening in Limpopo, it's happening in the Free State, it's happening in Northwest, and it's happening in Gauteng now that the stats has come out. That we have allowed this narrative to thrive, that is teenage pregnancies. And it's not teenage pregnancies, it's statutory rape. And when a family member decide that, or a perpetrator decide to go to my home to try and talk me out of it and pay, surely the police and the prosecutors and members of the community should know by now that that is a crime, irrespective of whether the perpetrator is going to try and bribe his way out. We have to treat them as such. That's statutory rape. And can we protect these young girls by doing the right thing and stop talking about teenage pregnancy, and stop talking about how they are not parented correctly and that's why they fall pregnant? Can we start to ask the right questions around why men think that it's okay to rape a 12-year-old Why men think that it's okay to rape a 6 months or a 1-year-old child. And so when we talk about what can be done, we have said we have to spend resources in this country, all of us, in the prevention of gender-based violence. If you look at the Omodoso case, you look at Pastor Zondo's case, you look at the many cases where men are using their power to try and not be held accountable and stimify the prosecution. Those young women who were violated by Omodoso, it's going to take forever for them to find justice, because Omodoso is using this law that we expect women to believe in and have trust in to be held accountable. So even the law itself is anti-women, because we force women to do as is prescribed in the law, but other people are not subjected to all of that. These laws are being implemented by people who have a hatred towards women, and they think that what happens to us is what we deserve.
Ladies, we are hopelessly out of time. We're into news time, but if I can just, Desiree, give you perhaps 30 seconds to give us your final remarks on this.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. If there is one thing that I think we as women and mothers should demand from the Minister of Police, is that in future all his statistics include statutory rape cases, because we have to stop making all women of all ages in one bundle. We have to know as South Africans what is the truth, the 6-year-olds, the 11-year-olds, and obviously those cases we found that happens at school premises are taking just too long. So yes, I think women, wherever we are, we have to stand up, we have to get this right, and we have to make sure that we are noticed and our demands are met and our dignity is protected as per the country's constitution.
Ladies, on that sobering note, thank you so much for your time this morning. Advocate Brenda Madumise-Pajibo, Director of Wise for Africa, and Desiree van der Walt, Limpopo Chairperson of the Democratic Party's Women's Network, talking to us about the increasing numbers of gender-based violence crimes in South Africa. It's over to Leanne for the latest news.